Mr. Sankeralli, thank you so much for coming in this morning.
I am the retired head, but they're in a transition now, so they sent me in.
You are the retired head.
Yeah.
All right, retired head, which means that he's still holding the mantle until and the transition is completed.
Well,
all right,
as called.
Explain to our listeners exactly what is the Bolivarian Solidarity Movement.
Well, the Trinidad and Tobago Bolivarian Solidarity Movement has been around now for about 10 years. And it has been seeking to support what we view as a progressive process in Venezuela and Latin America as a whole, in terms of basically the just distribution of wealth and resources in a continent that for centuries has seen the oppression of poor people by colonial and neo-colonial forces, where a small minority owns the vast amounts of the wealth. And that's what Venezuela was like before
That is
Chavez.
what many people believe is at the heart of what we're seeing right
Very
now.
much
Let me
so.
just get clarified one thing. Are you still attached to the University of the West Indies?
No, I am not.
No, you're no longer attached there, but you were pursuing a doctorate in cultural studies.
Yes,
so on.
and at the Mona campus in
Yes,
Jamaica.
at the Mona campus. All right. So let us talk about this. Let us talk about Venezuela. And I guess before we get to President Maduro, we must go to President Chavez, because you make the very important distinction that there was a desire, a move by President Chavez to redistribute the wealth of Venezuela. It is that redistribution of wealth, I believe, that is a problem. Looking at reports and viewing reports on the protest last week, there is a picture of extreme social and political uncertainty in Venezuela. Are these reports correct, first of all, to the best of your understanding? And if not, explain what we are seeing, because we've seen thousands upon thousands of people demonstrating. Please explain it.
Well, to the best of my understanding, the reports are highly slanted and one-sided. You have to understand what the real issue is in Venezuela. The real issue has to do with the oligarchy and with imperialism, right? You have an oligarchy in Venezuela that has presided over the oppression of masses of people for centuries. This oligarchy has practiced oppression. They are racist. They have tried to stop this process of basically justice for decades now, you can say, right? To give you an impression of how bad Venezuela was when Chavez came into power. Before Chavez came into power, he led a military coup against the government. That's a matter of the record. That military coup, in fact, followed a popular uprising of people in Caracas that Trinidadians do not know about, called the Caracazo, where from some estimates, 2,000 people were murdered by the state because people were objecting against IMF conditionalities coming from the metropolitan centers and benefiting the oligarchy. Because of that, Chavez led this attempted coup against the government. When it failed, he in a very dignified way said, we cannot achieve our objectives. A man who could be facing a firing squad gave this interview calm as ever. Por ahora, for now we cannot achieve our objectives. As a result of that coup, Chavez became the most popular man in Venezuela. Could you imagine Abu Bakr being the most popular man in Trinidad after the coup in 1990? That he got elected in a sweep of support in the next election?
Rhetorically, I will let you go.
Yeah, I mean, it is like that. Can you imagine that happening in Trinidad? That happened in Venezuela. Chavez tries to overthrow the government, and that makes him the most popular man in Venezuela, and he got massively elected because of that. That's to tell you what a mess that oligarchy had of Venezuela, of how much poor people, of how kind of oppression they were going in, that they would vote for the man who tried to violently throw the oligarchy.
Burton Sankeralli is the voice you're hearing, independent intellectual and head of the Bolivarian Solidarity Movement. We are talking about the situation in Venezuela. So in power sits President Hugo Chavez. The oligarchs, by this time, are more and more determined to have him removed because of his stated position that the people of Venezuela must benefit from the wealth of Venezuela. Then came what the world woke up one morning and found there was a coup in Venezuela. Funny thing is, it seemed as though the United States was the only country to support that, and then it was found out it was not in fact a coup. Explain to our listeners what happened there.
Well, yes, again, the oligarchy who were in collaboration with the U.S. foreign policy, because the real picture is also the international picture and the people who run the global order. And Venezuela represents a challenge to that, because Chavez has in fact been trying to change the global order, not just deal with Venezuela. He wants a just global order. And so things like UNISUR and CELAC and Petrocaribe here in the Caribbean come out of that movement for a just distribution of wealth. So early on, they tried to topple Chavez. And it's interesting looking at these attempts to topple Chavez, because I'm reading a book now about Chile, and it's like the same imperialist playbook they're using. Shortages of things like toilet paper. That's Chile. middle-class women beating pots in the street. That's Chile, when the CIA toppled successfully a socialist regime led by Allende and introduced Pinochet that murdered tens of thousands of Chileans. It's the same set of people basically trying to do this in Venezuela. And they thought they succeeded. They removed Chavez, right? They said he resigned, but the people who hired him refused to accept his resignation. So a couple million Venezuelans poured into Caracas. They knocked on the presidential palace door and said, "We want our president back." And they had to bring him back, right? So that is what the kind of things Chavez had to face against this whole imperialist apparatus. And these things are all a matter of record. You all can now go and look these things up on the internet. Thankfully.
Trying to bring our listeners into a full understanding of this, he did not win any friends in the Western world, particularly the United States, when he decided he was going to form a very close relationship with Cuba.
Well, okay, first of all, Chavez, subsequent to that first attempted coup, Chavez renounced the path of that kind of political strategy. Chavez led a democratic movement that supported widespread and massive support from the people of Venezuela. He's democratically elected. He presided over a people's constitution, one of the great constitutions ever written, right there next to the Haitian constitution, which we don't know about, that guarantees the rights of the poor, that guarantees the rights of women, that guarantees that women doing housework be paid, that guarantees the rights of indigenous people that were subjugated by the racist system that the oligarchy presided over, environmental rights, family rights, an extremely positive and progressive constitution that, of course, we don't know about in Trinidad because we are a U.S. satellite, right? And he had to deal with all of that opposition. Now, to that end, Chavez formed an alliance with Fidel Castro, one of the great Caribbean leaders of our time, who stood up to that same imperialist system for many decades and was seeking to promote this socialist, which basically means just vision of the distribution of wealth through Latin America. We're not talking about the Marxism that, when you think socialism, we think about versions of so-called Marxism that happened in Europe. We're talking about a people's movement that's aiming at the just distribution of wealth.
So it was Chavez's intention, just so listeners understand, President Chavez led Venezuela for a number of years. His background, very briefly, President Chavez. He came from the working class.
Yes, he came from the working class, from a very rough and difficult upbringing, and he joined the military. But he grew up hearing the opening words of the Venezuelan national anthem, which says, "Glory to the great people who broke the yoke." Defending virtue, law, and honor.
His revolution not dissimilar to what happens across the world, even in the United States, where the 1% running everything are the ones that are being targeted. In this case, however, it took a different direction. So Chavez passed on. But before we get into what to his demise and the introduction to power of President Maduro, I want to deal in this area of the oligarchs and their reaction after the failed coup attempt, because many have said that through the news media, that's how they ramped up the world opinion against Venezuela, against President Chavez. Was there any truth in that?
Well, that happened from before. When Chavez was toppled, you had, I've seen this interview, you had within one of the oligarchic TV stations, they are all boasting about, this wonderful plan we did. We removed Chavez. We removed Chavez. And they are boasting on this with a TV station that was obviously involved in it. Chavez did not immediately close down the TV station. If CNN tried to throw out Barack Obama, they might be facing the firing squad. Chavez didn't do that, right? But Chavez is supposed to be this big tyrant, and he allowed these people to continue for quite some time, and they continue to destabilize him along with a corporate Western media that's owned really by a global oligarchy.
But in addition to the Western media, it is alleged was also against him because he sought to reintroduce something that was tried by Cuba years before that, which was to bring the rest of the region into thinking of get rid of the yoke via some of his programs, which is the Petit Caribe, etc. So that was
Petro-Caribe.
Thank you very much. That was not the small Caribe, but the Petro-Caribe. You got it right. in the area of when Chavez, folks, many people say, was able to carry the revolution because he had a way of molding and articulating his vision, and that's how he was able to keep people together. Notwithstanding the unforeseen that no one can control, demise, drop in oil prices and so on, and the difficulties in Venezuela, there are many who believe that his successor, President Maduro, suffers from being a messenger unable to mold, articulate, and motivate with the same aspirations that Chavez had.
Well, first of all, the drop in oil prices is not caused by the weather. Right? There are economic forces at work that people control. Like when back in the 70s, you remember this, the younger people wouldn't, but when the Arab leaders got together and engineered the rise in oil prices, these things can be engineered. We have very good reason to believe that the United States, who has amassed massive oil reserves, and along with their people in the Middle East who control these prices, were very happy to do what they can to jack up the oil prices, because one, that would undermine Russia. Russia is one of the major, if not the greatest oil producer in the planet, and it would get at countries like Venezuela that dare defy the U.S.
Make clear for our listeners, just before you go on, the importance of Venezuela in OPEC, the importance of Venezuela because of the throughput, the oil production in Venezuela. Make clear to our listeners the reserve and what kind of influence they had in OPEC.
Venezuela is a major oil producer. In fact, Venezuela has, from when last I checked, the largest proven energy reserves on the planet. There's a process by which you have proven energy reserves. As a note to Trinidadians, most of those reserves are in the Orinoco, which is like a maxi taxi drive off the West Coast, right? So we are in the middle of it, right? And it's a fight to the death. Right? And there are massive reserves there, and the West wants to get in there to control that. So they're doing what they can to destabilize this present regime. Now, Maduro, and even Maduro knows this, is not Chavez. He does not have Chavez's charisma. From what I know of his leadership, he's proven to be a strong leader. But he's been dealt a very, very bad hand with this rise in oil prices. And then along with the Western media providing a very one-sided view. When Maduro was not in power long, the opposition oligarchy basically engineered a insurrection in the street that lasted a number of months. To explain it further, basically the oligarchy is working with the support of elements in Venezuelan society, most notably the middle class. Surprise, surprise, right? So, and though they engineered this massive insurrection, people died, and the media was trying to portray Maduro as the man behind it. But he was in fact trying to put down an insurrection against a democratically elected government. Right? Why didn't the Western media deal with the Occupy movement in the United States in the same way?
Not to lose the fact that many moves have been made in the parliament itself to have him removed. It is, they've been seeking signatures to get him removed. Make clear to our listeners what that is about.
Well, actually, Hugo Chavez put in his constitution the right of recall. So they are trying to use a provision that Chavez put there because Chavez really believed in democracy, and that's in the constitution, right? Now, the present government wants to make sure this thing goes through according to the correct procedures, but the opposition is bent on pushing and on forcing the issue through and on trying to portray Maduro as this undemocratic tyrant, again, because they are also agents of the corporate conglomerate Western media. Western media right now is dominated by people who could basically fit into this studio, right? And that's how they are portraying Venezuela. Yes, the oligarchies mobilizing crowds against Maduro, but there have been millions of people mobilized to defend the revolution. There have been massive crowds in Caracas defending the revolution. You don't see that in the Western media.
All right, balance this off for me. What we saw last week, for instance, is one example of throngs of people reportedly protesting the rule of President Maduro. Why are we not seeing those pictures coming out even from Venezuela itself, those who are in support of the
Well,
president?
they are. If you tune in to Telesur, to the South American network, which also comes out of that Bolivarian process, so that the people of, especially the disadvantaged people of Latin America, will get their own say into what they see on television and in the media. If you look at their coverage, it's very well covered there. But our people here, we are American satellites, and we are not carrying that here.
The voice of hearings out of Burton, Sankeralli, independent intellectual head of the Bolivarian Solidarity. Former head. Well, he's in transition, still heading, but okay, call is needed. All right. And we are talking about the other side, another look, a different look at what is going on in Venezuela. We cannot deny that times are very, very difficult for the Venezuelan people.
Yes. And
now, if the president moves on, like any politician would move in and introduce a state of emergency, one is to quell what has been going on in the parliament. One is to control what is being encouraged in the street. Let us accept all of that. But when you declare a state of emergency, you put it for a period hoping to quell a problem and waiting for something else to happen.
Yes.
Because, as we can see, the oil prices will never return to where they used to be. It's going to be a problem for a long time. It means the economic dilemma the country finds itself in will be there for a very long time. What is the one area or areas identified by the government that will be at the end of this state of emergency? Is it just there to bring calm, or is it waiting for time for something to happen differently that will stop the people in Venezuela from suffering as it is reported they are, as I think it is clear that they are?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what's in President Maduro's mind. Now, first of all, even with the state of emergency, Maduro has to walk a tightrope, because the people who control the world, basically, the U.S. and their media and the oligarchs in Venezuela, are looking for Maduro to cross the line, right? They are trying to provoke him to cross the line. Now, really, Maduro would be justified if one believed in the death penalty and putting people in front of a firing squad. That's what they would do in America, right?
They would put them through the process.
Yeah, they would put. That's what I mean through the process. Yes. I don't mean grabbing them, but I mean through a proper judicial process.
Words have powerful meanings. I just want to make sure
where in the West, in the West, and in Western democracies, which we love to drink from that trough, treason is still a capital offense. Even in countries where they no longer hang people for murder, they will still execute you for treason.
But there is no
Chavez and Maduro, let me say, have avoided doing that. They have avoided that path studiously.
Well, that is a recognition of dissent, because you have to recognize that. Yes.
Because I believe certainly Chavez was genuinely committed to democracy. But also because of the real politics where America and the media, and that's why I went here, where America and the media are looking for an excuse to launch some kind of maybe more militaristic invasion, not necessarily by U.S. troops. They kind of spread thin with the nonsense they're doing in the Ukraine and the Middle East, but maybe stirring up people on the border. They have issues with Colombia and other forces and things to do some kind of military intervention.
You're into your proxy sphere.
Well, yes, we're back into the Cold War and proxy wars. That was par for the course of the U.S. in those days. So Maduro has to walk that tightrope. He has to be firm, but he knows people are looking for an excuse to ramp up the thing into a new dimension of outright destabilization, by the oligarchs in the U.S. In terms of his longer vision, the situation is this. The opposition is pressing for a referendum based on the signatures they have collected. If this referendum is carried out before, I believe the date is the 20th of January, and if Maduro was to lose that referendum, they would then be able to have a snap election shortly after that date. But to pass that get that referendum done, you have to collect the signatures. You have to verify the signatures are real signatures, because we have reason to believe they are padding it and putting in dead people and children and all of that, right? And then you move to the referendum, right? There may not be time, and the information I have is that there is not time to get that done by the 20th of January. In which case, there will not be an election against the Chavez regime until a year or over a year after, in 2018. So that's the stake right now, whether we have an election in 2017 or 2018. I think that is what is really preoccupying Maduro's concerns right now.
The question that is raised, and you're right, there is an obsession, a convenient obsession often with human rights and so on in the Western world, and convenient. We're all aware of that. However, it does not take away from the question: are rights being violated in Venezuela?
Are rights being violated? Well, rights are being violated everywhere. The question is who's doing the violating and the context in which these things are being done. Not that I am defending these kinds of actions. The point is this.
I speak specifically in the area of the alleged jailing of a lot of opposition figures. That's what
From what I know, those are not violations of rights. So what I know, they are facing trial for crimes against the state, which happens in democracies, including Venezuela, all over. So as far as I know, the state is not involved in those kinds of activities, the Venezuelan state, as far as I'm aware.
All right, give Trinidad and Tobago and those who listen to us, even in Venezuela and across the world, so from your vantage point, how long? The last one took a couple of months. How long you think this situation of protest will continue in Venezuela? And since you do not know what President Maduro is hoping for that will change the fortune, I guess that's $1 million question. I just have to stay with the question. How long you think this situation will go on? Because it seems to be untenable right now. And many borders are being opened with neighboring countries to allow movement of goods inside. But at some point, if you don't have the revenue coming in and you're just taking, unless the country has enormous reserves, this bus is going to stall.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, if the opposition runs true to form, they will stretch this out. And if they don't get their election by the 20th, they might try to make that into an issue and try to ramp it up. And they are well funded. They are the oligarchy. They have all kinds of international connections. So if it were left up to them, they will probably want to do it until they get their election. Maduro may be forced to take firmer measures, which would be entirely justifiable. In terms of what he does next, now, I don't want to convey the impression that the problem that Chavez and now Maduro faces is only that of the oligarchy.
Right.
And,
because
there are serious internal problems, right? You had to basically switch. For one, you wanted to distribute wealth to the poor. Two, you wanted to set up a vision of how your society runs without dependence on oil. An issue we're facing, don't doubt it for a second. And three, related to this, you need to dismantle a bureaucracy that Chavez inherited that was internally corrupt.
Yes.
So there are real issues within the revolution that Chavez and Maduro is facing, which would be difficult in any case. Now, on top of that, you have to deal with this level of insane destabilization. Some people will think it's an impossible task. Some people say it's better to be like Trinidad and live on your belly groveling in the canal rather than stand up and get shot. Right?
I'm not too sure I'm going to agree with that.
No, but those are the choices that the Venezuelan people are facing, because Cuba faced it. Once you are prepared to stand up to the global order, you face a situation where you will be seriously destabilized, and there will be these kinds of situation of deaths and these things happening in the street. Poverty, we all know the hell Cuba went through. And are still going to. The embargo is still in place. Right?
The embargo is still in place, but they have, and which leads me to my final question to you, Burton Sankeralli. Cuba, thanks to the olive branch extended by the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and reality, more importantly, I don't think it was so much Obama as it was reality that said you cannot do this for 50 plus years with no results and continue the same thing. It is the epitome of madness, doing the same thing and expecting different results. Nothing happened there. But olive branch was extended to Cuba for that. You talk about assets being unfrozen and access to international market and so on. Is it ideologically so far a stretch for some accommodation and discussion to start with the United States by President Maduro and or his government to find some medium, some way in which the respect can be there for the revolution, but also you can coexist? Because, life is not, as not all about being right. Both can be right, depending on what they hold as their scope of rightness. Is there any chance of a lessening of tension between the United States and Venezuela is more accurately inquired?
Ideologically, it's not a problem. It has to do with power and the way the power is playing out. When I was in Venezuela, I went into a mall, right? And you were seeing the KFC and the Wendy's and all of these things. Venezuela is not an anti-capitalist society, contrary to popular opinion. It did not take the path Cuba did, contrary to popular opinion, right?
Nationalize everything.
They just wanted to distribute wealth in a just way. So I don't think there's any ideological problem there in terms of the U.S. It has to do with the forces at play that it's not even Obama's fault personally. But
well, the U.S. said they are all about, and I understand where you differentiate it, but the U.S. is saying that they are a capitalist system that we know, and there's a socialist system in Venezuela. But because once you get to redistribution of wealth, that is the label that goes with it.
Yes,
unfortunately.
yes, and that is how they label it. And the real issue is the U.S. does not want countries getting their own ideas and trying to do things their own way. I mean, the U.S. could have approached Cuba very differently.
I thought we were not talking about Haiti. We were talking about Venezuela.
Cuba, but by way of example. But the U.S. and the forces of whom the American president is just a puppet at the end of the day, do not want countries getting their own ideas. They destabilize Chile. They destabilize Nicaragua, right? We know what happened with Cuba. Well, we know what happened with Haiti from way before. This is what they're doing in Venezuela. Bolivia is up against it. Ecuador up against it. It's par for the course in the American universe. Yes.
In is part of the course in our backyard, somebody said.
Yes.
Let me thank you very much. Let me start. Thank you very much, Burton Sankeralli.
Sankeralli.
What did I do? You see my copy. I erred in my own typing here.
Yes.
Burton Sankeralli. I apologize. Let me thank you very much, independent thinker. And I like the perspective you come from because it affords us the opportunity of hearing both sides.
Okay.
It is the one-sidedness that sometimes leaves us all blind.
Yes.
And I appreciate your truth. Let's put it that way. I appreciate your representation here this morning. Thank you so much, folks who would like to find out more about the Bolivarian solidarity movement. Where can they go to find out more information?
Well, we have a presence on the internet. I am also have a presence on the internet, like through Facebook. Just get my name right. And then we have good contacts with the Venezuelan embassy as well, so they can also pass that on. I am hoping also to be launching a book soon on this whole topic and process. So,
Bolivarian Solidarity Movement. You can go up and get some information there. And the name is Burton Sankeralli.
Yes.
Get it right. Burton Sankeralli. Rennie Bishop, you get it right. Burton, thank you so much for coming in, and thank you so much for what you give to us this morning.
Yes.
Have yourself a wonderful day. Thank you so much. It's, 5 minutes after 11 o'clock. You are inside Brunch this morning. It is still the highest temperature we will have for today. It's currently 31 degrees. The president of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, Devon Sinanan, will be joining us when we come back and continue inside Brunch.